Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to United Way Bay Area's 4th media briefing. I'm Stephanie Kim. I'm the Senior Director of Census 2020 at UWBA. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we've been holding these media briefings about Bay Area specific census outreach since last October. And the point of them are to help provide the facts and the context that you need to know to keep doing the important work of reaching our community members about the census. So thank you so much for all the work that you have put in to all the reporting around the census, and thank you for the work that you are continuing to do, especially with everything else going on. As you can see in the title slide of this deck, we are deep in the census. Yes, it's still happening, and yes, there is still time to respond. It feels like we're in mile 35 of a marathon that has turned into an ultra marathon. And despite everything else going on, you're all here because you understand that the census is so much more than just an address-based count, right? It is the fight for every person to be seen, to be heard, to be included, and to be valued in the decisions that are made for our communities. Now, since our last briefing in March, which seems like a whole universe away from where we are right now, lots of things have changed, but what has not changed is the fact that every person living in the US has the right to be counted, period. So with that, let's get started. Here is our packed agenda for the day. So what we have here is a 50-minute briefing. Your phone lines have been muted, so you can communicate using the chat box. Please drop a line and introduce yourself so we know who's in the room, and you could feel free to enter any questions that you might have. We have a lot of content to get through, and so we're going to be holding questions all the way till the end. But we have my colleagues Julia Marks from Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Asian Law Caucus on the line, as well as Josh Green from the US Census Bureau, who can help answer questions as well. And then anything we don't cover, you can feel free to reach out to my colleague, Tammy Kelly. So as you can see, we're going to start with the operations update of just what's going on right now in census land. We're going to talk a bit about all the different updates we've had to make from UWBA in light of COVID-19. And then I'm going to go into an analysis of just what the Bay Area response rate looks like right now. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because it's a lot of numbers, and it takes some context to understand what those numbers actually mean and what it means to get those numbers up in the weeks we have ahead. And then speaking of what we have ahead, we'll talk about just what's going on these next few weeks. We're going to be entering our final big push of outreach to make sure that as many people respond to the census by the end of this month. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll give you an update on what's been changed on our press kit. You'll be able to find this recording of this webinar, plus the slides, plus the press kit, all on our website. So please check there after this call in the afternoon. You'll be able to find that information. All right. So starting with US Census Bureau Operations Updates. This is up to date as of the 19th. And I always put the date because things are usually changing at a constant rate, but you could check on this link that we provided here for any real-time status updates on where things are for the various operations. So what we know is that the response deadline for the census has been pushed by 3 months, and the response deadline is now October 31st. So that is the data collection deadline that we are now working towards, as opposed to the original July 31st deadline. Group quarters enumeration, which is the counting of group living quarters, such as universities and colleges and live-in hospitals and prisons, that is taking place right now and should wrap up in early September. There is a mobile questionnaire assistance initiative, which I'll share a little bit about later, which is taking place starting last week through mid-September. That has been postponed in many counties in California, including all of the Bay Area counties because of COVID-19. So again, more on that a little later. This week, we should be seeing another postcard mailing to all non-responding households about the census. So that is a new addition that has come out from the Census Bureau. And then, as I mentioned, this is our final push to get that response rate up, because starting in August, the Census Bureau is going to start their non-response follow-up operation. So this means that for all the addresses that have not yet responded to the census on their own, there are going to be census takers who are sent out to help collect the response in person. Transitory location enumeration, so these are places like mobile homes, RV parks, that is going to take place in the month of September. And then service-based enumeration, you love all the different operations and their acronyms. And targeted non-shelter outdoor location enumeration, this is basically the counting of the unhoused communities and people experiencing homelessness. This is going to take place in a 3-day period mid-September, September 22nd to 24th. And then as I mentioned, the self-response deadline, so the last day that you could respond to the census through any of these means is October 31st. And in the meantime, as you might be aware, the Census Bureau has requested Congress to provide a 120-day extension for apportionment and redistricting deadlines. Those were originally slated to be December 31st, so they've asked to push them into 2021. So there are 2 pending bills on that extension. Quick reminder as I keep going through this, please do check into the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're calling in from so we know who's in the room. Thank you. All right. Here is the new census mailings that are being sent out this week. If you go to this link, you could actually see an image of every single mailer that comes out from the census. And as you can see, they are bilingual in English and Spanish, and they're really encouraging people to respond as soon as they can. There's a separate mailing that was sent out to all PO boxes. So this is to reach people who are not living in traditional city-style addresses, so homes in rural communities. They got a reminder in their PO boxes to look in front of their home because a census taker has actually dropped off a packet for them to fill out the census. Now, when it comes to hiring for the Census Bureau, the Census Bureau is in the process of wrapping it up. They shared in a press conference a couple weeks ago that they are in an incredibly good place to be fully staffed and to conduct non-response follow-up as planned. So that means that the Bay Area staffing has really, for the most part, been completed. And the training for most census takers begins on July 31st for work starting August 11th. For those of you curious, census takers will be paid on a weekly basis. When we were really promoting those jobs earlier this year, they are well-paying opportunities and really good opportunities for community members to help get each other counted. So they will be paid, including for training. And then Josh says that the last day to apply for jobs online is August 17th. So that's the absolutely last day that you can submit your application there. Now, for the actual non-response follow-up operation, the Census Bureau has issued a mandate for every employee with public interaction to be required to wear a face mask for obvious reasons. So we can be sure that people going out into the communities are going to be taking the public health precautions needed to keep themselves and the community members safe. They're going to be equipped with washable cloth masks and also hand sanitizer bottles. And then they've been given modified instructions. So, they're going to knock on the door or ring on the doorbell, and then they're going to maintain that 6 feet distance throughout the interaction. And then, obviously they're not able to enter any domicile. They're going to conduct everything outside. And then for those of you who might be curious, and we have received these questions in the past, census takers cannot be accompanied by community partners or by the media. So if you wanted to show some film footage or photograph an interaction to use in your story, due to Title 13 and the confidentiality protections in place, they cannot allow that. But if you go to the Census Bureau's website and their press kit, they do have some B-rolls that you can use. All right, I mentioned mobile questionnaire assistance. So this is an operation where census workers go into heavily trafficked places in the communities and they stand there with a tablet and they help collect census responses in person. So given all the different shifts that were made due to the pandemic, they've decided to concentrate MQAs at food distribution centers, farmers markets, and other central outdoor locations. And then they're working with local partners to let them know where these locations would be so that they can help get the word out. So this launched nationally last week in places where it was determined safe to do so. In the Bay Area, it looked like 2 locations in San Mateo County and 2 locations in San Francisco County. In San Francisco, there were 2 MQA census takers who were stationed at the San Francisco Farmers Market last Wednesday, and they counted 26 people in 7 languages within 3 hours. So it was pretty exciting to hear. But unfortunately, right after that, due to local pandemic conditions, they decided to suspend future MQAs until after August 1st. They're going to be looking at local conditions. They're not going to be reopening if it's deemed unsafe. So at this point, we don't know if after August 1st, MQAs will resume, or they're going to decide to just focus on the other outreach and enumeration plans that they currently have. I actually have here some photos that were sent to us by a local partnership specialist of what the farmers market and MQA looks like. And then here's them taking some census responses. So as Josh mentioned in the chat, anyone who has any questions on the census operations front and is looking for formal statements or information from the Bureau, Josh is your guy to help point you in the right direction with the information that you need. So please contact him. And then for questions for anything outside what's called the LA region, which is basically the West Coast of the United States, you can contact PIO@census.gov, and that's the folks in DC who can give you more national-based information. All right, so that's all we have for census operations. Let's talk about what happened over the last few months with the pandemic hitting us in March. And I still remember the week that the shelter-in-place hit, we had the media briefing. There were, no one had any idea that it would blow up to what it's become today. But luckily, our partners have been preparing for this for a really long time, and we've been able to shift together. I actually really like to use the metaphor of retuning the dials of what we were doing. We all ended up doing activities that we had planned for, and we just jumped on different mediums to make it happen. So given shelter in place and the census timeline extension by 90 days, the first thing that we did at United Way Bay Area and with a coordination with our partners was we issued a no penalty adjustment and extension of our census outreach contracts. We have over 100 grantees who are planning on wrapping up at the end of July, which is 2 weeks from now. So we let them know, we understood that there were some organizations who had to shift their focus to providing basic needs and services to community members, who had to shift to pandemic relief, and who also had to temporarily close their doors. And so it turned out that 70% of our grantees that were partnered with us before COVID hit needed to shift their activities due to the pandemic. So most of the shifts look like digital outreach, so email, texting, social media, and Zoom. Any in-person questionnaire assistance that we were planning on, we had planned on 525 questionnaire assistants in the centers in the Bay Area, got shifted to virtual, and then instead of in-person door-to-door canvassing, we switched to phone banking. And then we've asked all of our partners to limit the in-person outreach to essential service areas and existing touch points, potentially COVID touch points. So for instance, food distribution, testing sites, grocery stores, and the like. In March, we also announced that since we understood that shifting your activities takes time and resources, we would distribute an additional $400,000 in grants. We committed to distributing them in a biweekly basis, and I'm really proud that we were able to achieve that. We gave 35 new grants in March and April to new and existing grantees. Most of the adjustments were staffing. A lot of folks had to bring on more staff because it takes more staff to be able to phone bank or to provide assistance virtually, whereas, if you have the same number of staff, people just walk in your door and you could serve them in multiple ways at once. And then a lot of folks started relying on in-kind giveaways. So what can we give out? Swag, collateral, care kits at, essential service locations to keep people interested and excited. For phone banking, we are very proud to see that over 1,400 volunteers from within 30 organizations helped us phone bank to over 180,000 households in the Bay Area, focused on hard-to-count areas and low-responding areas since the pandemic hit. We also learned, supported our regional 211 network, and they've made over 40,000 impressions on callers through multilingual hold messages that everyone had to listen to, and also referrals that were made by the call specialist directly to the Census Bureau lines. And then lastly, we sent 80,000 postcards, including 5,000 postcards that were handwritten by volunteers as messages to their neighbors to low-responding tracts, since people are at home, and we're trying to continue to think of non-contact ways of reaching them. All of this outreach has been informed by live self-response rates. So ever since March, the Census Bureau was publishing the actual rates of response in different neighborhoods. And so this is how we determined. On the left map, you see areas highlighted in blue are the places that were low responding and also extremely hard to count. We figured out the different languages spoken by most of the folks there and sent out bilingual postcards. And then on the map on the right, you could see where all the phone banking took place. All the areas that you see highlighted in blue are the areas that we had phone banked in. So using data to continue to inform what we do has been super paramount for us and for our partners to be able to achieve the response rates that we see today, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Before that, I wanted to highlight just a few things that our partners have been doing too. We've been blown away at their creativity, their nimbleness, their flexibility, and their resilience. So a few examples: Canal Alliance up in Marin County, they posted a video on Facebook walking through how to fill out your census paper form and questionnaire form in Spanish. And then because they also ended up hosting a COVID-19 testing site in their neighborhood, you know, the ones where people are like getting ready and they like zoom into the camera and come out. And they featured their We Hello Count t-shirts and, you know, presented census facts in English and Spanish. Korean Community Center of the East Bay created an in-language mobile 4-step guide that you could share digitally on how to take the census online. And then you might remember from our last briefing, San Jose Public Library, they were planning all these fun census story times. They ended up recording them and posting them on YouTube. So this is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples out of over 100 organizations that have each creatively shifted to do their outreach to their communities. And thanks to their outreach, we've made over 140 million impressions in the Bay Area. Now, granted, you see on the pie chart on the left, the majority is through advertising, which shouldn't be discounted. We've been running a big multilingual advertising campaigns. But what you could see on the breakdown on the right, it's been a lot of social media posts, quite a bit of phone banking, giving out collateral and flyers and swag, you know, all a variety of activities that have together helped make those impressions. So this is what it's led to. Now, this is a zoomed out look of what the self-response trajectory has looked like from mid-March all the way through now up to date as of July 19th, so 2 days ago. The top chart is the response rates of the Bay Area compared to the national and state response rates. So as you can see, the first few weeks of March, which is when the first postcards were sent out from the Census Bureau and the invitation letter, there's a really steep slope going up. So response rates are growing really quickly. But even since the very beginning, the Bay Area's response rate has been trending higher than the state and national response rates, which have been kind of on par with each other. And then when you look at the chart on the bottom, these are the 7 Bay Area counties that we are working with. And again, you see sort of a parallel upward slope, and then the flattening of this curve after, you know, mid-May, early May. So you see each of the counties. San Francisco is trailing a little behind everyone else, but overall we are doing exceedingly well in the Bay Area. As of the 19th, the national self-response rate is 62.2%. State self-response rate is 63.4%. So out of 50 states, we are number 23. And then the Bay Area response rate is 69.2%. So we are way up there. I'm proud to share that we are the first region in the state with the first county to cross their 2010 self-response rate. Congrats to San Mateo County for achieving that a few days ago. But what does this actually mean? Now, I've written this very text-heavy slide for you, and I hope you will print it out and post it on your home office wall, because it is really key to understanding what these numbers, what the implications actually are. So I'm going to bring you into like a semi-statistics lesson slash census lesson. So first of all, the self-response rate means the percentage of total known addresses that have self-responded online, by phone, or by mail to the census. So it does not refer to the percentage of the population that has responded. So even though an address is marked as responded, it could be that they forgot to count the person living in the ADU in the back, right? So it doesn't show us anything about population count. It's just based on the addresses that are in the master Rolodex that the Census Bureau uses. This also does not include the responses from group living facilities or from people experiencing homelessness. So when you see those operations happening, especially in September, the self-response rate is not going to go up, even though they're going to say that they've completed the counting of all service-based locations in San Francisco, for instance. So just keep that in mind. Because this is a percentage, it's a fraction, and it has I was going to say enumerator. It has a numerator and a denominator. And the denominator right now includes vacant addresses. So this means that the response rate is going to actually bump up higher once the Census Bureau cleans out all the data after October 31st and removes all those vacant and empty addresses. So just as an FYI there. Big key thing to know is that starting in August, once census takers start going and knocking on doors, that is part of the non-response follow-up operation and not self-response, which means that even though they finish going through a census tract and knocking on all the doors on the houses in a certain neighborhood, that number is not going to be reflected in the self-response rate. So unfortunately, we're going to be running a little blind starting mid-August. The self-response rate, however, will still continue to increase because it could be that, say, someone knocks on your door, says, "Hi, I'm a census taker." They have their ID badge, they have their Census Bureau logo on their laptop or their phone, and you say, "You know what, I don't really want to talk to you, but I'm going to go online right now, or I'm going to call the Census Bureau and take it over the phone or online." If you respond on your own, that will still be a self-response, and it'll make the number go up. But if you respond to the census taker, then that won't be reflected in the response rate. Hopefully that made some sense. Lesson in statistics: for cities and counties with larger populations and thus a greater number of housing units, more responses are needed in order to increase the response rate by each percentage point. So think about the different counties. Santa Clara County, for instance, is huge, has a really big population, a lot of households. So for them, each response rate percentage going up means that they have to count many more houses to make that happen. Lastly, I get this question a lot. People say, how are we doing compared to the 2010 census? At this point, it's impossible to draw comparisons, especially on the daily rate, because there's no historical precedent for the extended self-response timeframe. So we are working towards our 2010 goals, knowing that that's a benchmark of what we've been able to achieve last census. But other than that, we can't say we're doing better or worse. It's just different. So our goal, knowing all of this, is to get the self-response rate as high as possible before the non-response follow-up period operation begins, so that we could minimize the number of people who needs to be enumerated by a census taker. So every place is going to look different. In some places, the self-response rate will be 50%, and we're going to be like, yes, that is good enough because it's definitely better than what we achieved last census. In other places, it'll be 70%. In other places, it might even be higher. And just as an FYI, the average self-response rate achieved in California for the 2010 census was 68.2. So already the Bay Area is above that average, but knowing the needs of our community, we could go much further. So here's a snapshot of what things look like right now, well, 2 days ago. But at this point, the response rate is changing by like a fraction of a percentage every few days. So this is pretty much what it's going to look like in the coming weeks. The numbers will change, but the rankings and how they stand relative to each other might not. As you can see, San Mateo County, as I mentioned, has a 73.2% self-response rate. They are ranked #1 in the state of California as having the highest response rate in the state. And they have hit their 2010 self-response rate. Now, if you look at all the census tracts within that county, the 73.2% refers to the average response rate. So it's a sum divided by the total number. What you're looking at, the 56% here, is the percentage of all tracts where the 2020 self-response rate has exceeded the 2010 self-response rate. So this means about half of the tracts have achieved that goal, and half have not. Half are still below their 2010 rate, even though the county average has. So all of this is to say that there are still a lot of folks left to be counted. And, you know, while it's great to celebrate the exceptional achievement they've made in reaching this response rate, we can't be satisfied until we get that number as high as possible. And you can see this with the other counties. So Contra Costa County and Santa Clara County are actually tied for second. They're both at 71.4%. You can see that Contra Costa ended with a higher self-response rate in 2010 than Santa Clara did, so their goalposts are a little different. But you can see that the percentage of tracts are much lower. So in Santa Clara County, only 40% of all the tracts have achieved their 2010 self-response rate. Now the column on the right, what it shows you is if you got to see, if every single tract had a certain number of responses every day between the 19th and the 31st of this month, how many houses need to respond in order to achieve that 2010 self-response rate? So in Contra Costa County, if just one house in every single tract in the county responded to the census, they could hit their self-response rate. In Santa Clara County, it's looking like 4. When you go down to Marin County, they are so close, they're just 1% away. For them, it's it looks like 2 houses in every tract, and I'll show you a map later where all those are concentrated. Alameda County is also in the top 10 at 69.4%. They are so close also to their final 2010 self-response rate, and for them, it's also looking like 1 house per tract. Solano County, super close. They're 0.1% away from their self-response rate in 2010, less than 1 house. And then we have San Francisco, which is currently at a 60.2% self-response rate. They're about 8 percentage points away from their 2010 goalpost. Only 2% of their tracts have exceeded their 2010 self-response rate. And we're looking at more like 15 houses a day in every single tract have to respond in order to achieve their 2010 rate. So I know this is a lot of numbers, and I know that many of you are reporting on just certain areas, so hopefully you could just pick and choose the points that are useful for you. Here's another look of what this all looks like. So which areas did well, first of all? This is a list of all the counties and their current self-response rates. And then you could see on the right is the list of the highest responding areas. So these are areas in Alameda County, for instance, we're looking at a self-response rate that's higher than 82%. That is incredible. So, you know, Piedmont, Montclair, Albany, Berkeley Hills, lots of places in Dublin and Pleasanton, though there is one place in Dublin that's actually in the bottom responding areas. Contra Costa County, you could also see similarly, their highest areas have responded over 83%. Marin, 78%, San Francisco, 70%. So even the highest responding areas in San Francisco are at a lower place than the other counties. So again, it's a thing of averages, right? So that's how the numbers work. San Mateo County, 84.5%. Santa Clara is also up in the 80s, and then Solano is up at 75%. So if you look on the map on the right, the areas that are highlighted in yellow are the areas that are in the top 10% responding census tracts in the Bay Area. So, you know, see if you can notice some trends about, you know, what do those areas have in common? What do those areas have different? And then the areas that are highlighted in dark purple, these are the ones where there still needs to be a lot of work done. So what does that mean? Where do we still need help? So again, now we're looking at the same list, but it highlights all the tracts in green that have that are the bottom 10 to 20% lowest responding tracts in the county. So for Alameda County, again, the self-response rate for the bottom 10% of the tracts is lower than 55%. So while the county is close to 70 in average self-response rate, there are certain tracts in Oakland, Hayward, Berkeley, Ashland, and Dublin where still only 1 out of 2 addresses have responded to the census. That's what 55% means. In Contra Costa, you're looking at Richmond, Martinez, Concord, Pittsburgh, Antioch, Byron, and Bethel Island. Update Lee, which I highlighted here, means that it is a more rural tract with non-city style addresses. So people have actually received a paper form that was dropped off in front of their house. Marin County, you can see on the map, there's that giant purple chunk on the left side of the county, on the west side of the county. So West Marin, North Marin, and then also some small spots, San Rafael, Marin City, and Watts. San Francisco, the bottom 10% responding tracts are located in Bayview, Hunters Point, the Mission, Tenderloin, Lakeshore, and Soma districts. We are looking at a self-response under 50%. There are some neighborhoods where it's 4 out of 10 houses that have responded to the census. San Mateo, as you could see, the bottom 10% is higher than the other counties, so again, averages. Santa Clara is at 60%, and then Solano is at 59%. Okay, so I mentioned before and a few slides ago what it looks like if every single tract in the county had, how many houses in every single tract have to respond in order to reach their 2010 rate in between now and the end of July. And we saw that for most of them, like Alameda County, it was like 1 house, right? So 1 house in every tract in Alameda County has to respond in order to reach their 2010 percentage rate. So what we did there was we removed all the high responding tracts and we asked that question again. When it comes to Berkeley, when it comes to Pittsburgh or the financial district in San Francisco, if we focus just in on that tract and their current response rate, how many houses have to respond to the census every day between now and the end of July in order to reach their 2010 response rate? Here's what those numbers look like. So the good news is that for places, for many of the places that you see, it is still like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses a day. So that is the amount of outreach that needs to be done over the next few weeks. If you look in places like San Francisco, we're looking at 12, 18 or 19 houses in Chinatown, 11 houses in the Mission District, 17 houses at North Beach. So the San Francisco census team is tirelessly working. They've been tirelessly working. We are trying to really amp up our outreach to low responding tracts, knowing that they need a lot more support than the other areas that have already achieved their high self-response rate. Okay, so we did some analysis on the Bay Area's self-response, and we broke it down based on ethnic group, racial and ethnic group, and also by language, because we wanted to know, is this sort of an all things equal situation, which we knew from the beginning it's not. Who is being left behind? So who is being left out of the count at this point? And so when you're looking at the lowest responding tracts in the Bay Area, the predominant non-white race or ethnic group in 70% of the region's lowest responding tracts is Hispanic or Latinx. And this is based on, you guessed it, census data from the American Community Survey a few years ago. So this is what we're working off of. It could be, it has a few caveats, a little nuanced. And as you see, we've just aggregated all of the Bay Area racial and ethnic groups into 3 categories. The census data that we were working with does not allow for disaggregation. So I get a lot of questions of, can you tell me how many of the Asian population is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander or South Asian? And I can't give that to you from here, but at least this could help us do some targeting. The predominant non-white race and ethnic group in 83% of the region's highest responding tracts is Asian, but in 20%, also in 20% of the region's lowest responding tracts. Whew, I wrote out these little narrative analysis on the right because it still takes me a little bit to wrap my head around it. But all of this is to say is that, understandably, the non-white race and ethnic groups in the Bay Area both encompass a number of the top responding tracts and also the bottom responding tracts. And you see that reflected in the languages as well. So Spanish is the predominant non-English language spoken in 76% of the region's lowest responding tracts and 20% of the highest responding tracts. Chinese is the predominant non-English language spoken in 59% of the region's highest responding tracts. So again, this is just looking for the top language, the top non-English language. It doesn't take into account, the fact that, most of the Black community will speak English, right? So that's not included in here, but there's still encompass of 10% of the lowest responding tracts in the regions. So, see if you could compare these 2 charts and draw the conclusions that you need to understand what is the type of outreach that continues to need to be done. And in the meantime, we've looked at this and said, okay, we need to make sure that the big push we put out there is definitely at least bilingual in English and Spanish, definitely tailored to reflect the messaging research about reaching the Hispanic and Latinx community. Also ensuring that despite the fact that a lot of Chinese-speaking tracts have responded to the census. So we've found these languages and are refocusing our efforts on that. So this leads me to what is ahead, and I am almost done with these slides and we could go into Q&A soon. So we have 3 weeks remaining before the non-response follow-up operation begins. And what we are telling everyone is to respond before the door knock. This is a national push, this is a state push, and a local push. And what we're saying to our community members is that starting August, census takers will be visiting households that have not yet responded to the census. So you should complete the census as soon as possible if you do not want to receive a knock on the door. This is not by any means meant to scare folks. It's just a statement of fact of what's going to happen next. And we know that our community members have various concerns with the pandemic, with everything else about having someone come to your door. So, you know, people should know that they could still respond online, by phone, or by mail on their own, technically until October 31st, but you want to get that response in really by the end of this month. So what we are planning, you know, in coordination with our state, local, and national partners, is another census week of action. So this is our last campaign to try and increase the self-response rate as high as possible before non-response follow-up begins. And any support you could provide in making sure that people understand that now is the time. It's not too late, but it's also time is running out. Is going to be so helpful. So we have put in an order for another 100,000 bilingual postcards to be sent out to the lowest responding tracts. We've created new postcards. We're planning a weekend aerial Spanish language banner flyover in low responding tracts in the region that we know to have predominantly Spanish speaking residents. We're going to be running around and placing new lawn signs that say respond before the door knock in low responding areas in multiple languages. We're going to be sending 2 final rounds of regional text messages just to let people know the timeline and also what to expect in August. You know, at least if you know, some people are fine in receiving a knock on the door, that's great. And we want to make sure that they understand how to identify a census taker. We're going to continue our phone banking through mid-August. We're going to continue our social media outreach. We're going to continue our multilingual paid digital and out-of-home ad campaign. You should be seeing our ads in grocery stores, laundromats, pharmacy clinics, transit stops, buses, etc. And then lastly, this is actually a really big thing. We're providing as much swag and collateral and other in-kind support to our network of partners as we can, because we know that their capacity is limited. If it means that they could give out a bunch of t-shirts that say "We Held Account" at a testing site to get people excited about the census, we want to help. So we've instructed our partners to reach out to us there. And then just so you know, a lot of our partners are going to be wrapping up after that. They're ramping down their peak census outreach activities to dedicate more resources to the important COVID-19 relief work that is already taking place and will continue to take place, and also get out the vote outreach efforts, which are, you know, it's kind of like the other hand, the other side of the census coin, of the democracy coin. So lots going on. Here's a preview of the postcards that we're sending out. And we have put this into our resource folder for anyone to just download and print and send out. And as you could see, we're providing information about what to know about census workers. So first of all, they must carry a photo ID badge with a U.S. Department of Commerce watermark and expiration date. Census workers, sort of like on the actual census form, will never ask you about your finances, your citizenship or immigration status, or your social security number. And then lastly, you know, it's so important to continue to emphasize that your responses are protected by extremely strong laws. So it is against the law for them to share your answers with anyone, including your landlord, your employer, police, or any government agency. And then lastly, we have the phone number to Josh's office where, oh, it's not Josh's office, but the LA regional office where you can verify a census worker's identity if you want to. So we put this out in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and Arabic, which you saw in a couple slides ago, were the languages that were most predominantly spoken in the low responding tracts. Okay, so I'm really coming to the end here. So all of this to say, we are messaging 5 things about the census. This has not changed since the beginning of all this work. For some of us a year ago, for some of us 2 years ago. and it's the following. First of all, there are many ways you can respond on your own right now. You could do it online, by phone, by mail, or in person with a census taker as soon as possible. And census takers will follow up in person starting in August. Number two, the census is important. It determines funding and representation for the next 10 years. When we think about pandemic relief, when we think about the systems that people are protesting, based on generations of underrepresentation and undercounting, all of this can be changed by being counted in the census. Number three, everyone counts. Every person living in the country has a right to be counted. And this includes every person living in your house, including if you're not related to them. Number four, the census does not and will not ask about your citizenship or immigration status, period. Number five, the census is safe. So individual census responses, as I mentioned, are confidential and protected by extremely strong laws. This is the inoculation message that it is upon us to share with our communities. For anything that comes up, between now and the end of the census, it's important for all of us here to know the facts, to know the motivations behind anything else that's coming out, and to continue to reiterate to our community members that this is something that we all deserve to participate in. Okay, so press kit updates. When you go on our website, you will find a summary of the campaign to date. We've updated it with our new grantees since the pandemic. We've also put the updated Census Bureau operations timeline, so you could just reference it as you're continuing your reporting. We put, if you thought this was a detailed snapshot, we actually have a county by county breakdown listing every single one of the low responding census tracts and what their response rate is as of 2 weeks ago. So you could take a look at that, and then you can visit our website to get all of this information. All right. So we've made it to the end of this. We have 7 minutes for Q&A. What I'm going to do is take a look at the chat box here, and feel free to enter questions if you haven't already. And thank you, Josh, again, for submitting, putting your contact info. To respond, to put it into the chat box. All right, Kylie asks, what is the messaging about the Trump effort to not include undocumented in count? I'm going to have Julia Marks from Asian American Advancing Justice, Asian Law Caucus, chime in to speak on this. Julia, I think you have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so first I just want to caveat that while we were on this call, the memorandum was released. So this is still a developing story, and we're looking into the details of it. But basically the memo says that for the purposes of reapportioning congressional seats, undocumented immigrants should not be included in that apportionment count. So that is what we deem to be a blatantly unconstitutional action. The Constitution says that everyone counts, and that apportionment is based on the number of whole persons in each state. So deciding unilaterally to is unconstitutional. And so we're confident that there will be legal action about this issue. But for messaging to community members, it's very important to continue to uplift the fact that everyone should be counted in the census, that there is no question about immigration status, there's no question about citizenship, and that all persons count here in the United States. So if people have follow-up concerns about this specific memorandum, then it's appropriate to raise some of the more kind of detailed legal components, but we just want to repeatedly uplift the fact that the census does not care about immigration, and it does not care about citizenship. I also just want to highlight how narrow this memorandum is. While we find it hugely problematic and unconstitutional, and are very concerned that if it went forward, it would have consequences for political representation. It's also important to note that it's about this one narrow use of the census. So in our messaging, we've been talking about how the census is used for funding, the census is used for making decisions about policy, the census is used for, being seen, being counted, having folks know, like, my community is here and should be considered when we're, distributing resources, distributing projects, services, etc. So all of those things are still so important and completely unaffected by this memo. Additionally, a lot of the political considerations are still in place. So state redistricting, local redistricting, all of that is completely untouched by this memo. And finally, we think this memo is unconstitutional, so it shouldn't, damper people's sense that their presence matters for fair representation in this country.
Thanks, Julia. And yeah, to reiterate, if you have the ability to know the facts about the census and really help inoculate our community members with those facts, and we all are aware of the motivations behind these types of movements from the administration. So to Julia's point, it's very new, and we want to make sure that when we are reporting and commenting on it, that we know all the facts around it. But the bottom line is that it is unconstitutional, and I do not see it having legs moving forward. So we're going to continue onward with our messaging to community members that every person, according to the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, has a right to be included in the census. We got a question from Fernando. If you sent postcards already and you got your response, why are you sending them again? Are postcards successful or failure? So Fernando, the new postcards that we are sending out have different messaging from the postcards that we sent a couple of weeks and months ago. So as you probably can imagine, the Census Bureau has sent out multiple mailings to households, and it takes, for especially our hardest to reach community members, multiple impressions to be able to understand or to be in a place where they can respond to the census. So our earlier messaging and the earlier postcards even sent from the Census Bureau were really about, you have time to get counted. This new postcard is really around uplifting a more urgent message around the timing and letting folks know how and what to expect when a census taker comes to their door. So it's not, at this point, the people who are still in the non-self-response percentage that we're looking at are definitely the hardest to count people. And it's going to take an exponentially greater amount of effort to reach them and get them counted than those who responded the first week in March. All of our friends probably, and yourselves maybe, you got your census thinking, I know what to do with this, and you went online. For many members of our community, it's not been that way. Whether it's not knowing what the census is or why it's important, how it's, everyone needs to be counted, how your data is safe, how it does impact, pandemic response and our, well-being and liberation as a community. All of that is tied to the census. So we're trying to message that as many times and as many ways as possible. Any other questions? We are at 10:50. So what I'm going to do is we're going to call this briefing to a close. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact Tammy at Brazier Communications. The contact info is here. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in, going through those content-heavy slides with us. You can find them online. And thank you again for the work that you continue to do. We hope you're taking care. Feel free to reach out if you need anything. All right. Bye, everyone.